Βλέπετε ντοκιμαντέρ? Εγώ ναι. Μπορώ να θυμηθώ πολλά ντοκιμαντέρ που μου άρεσαν λίγο ή πολύ, αλλά υπάρχει ένα που με προβλημάτισε πολύ. Κατηγορώ τον Morgan Spurlock, διότι εξαιτίας του δεν θα καταφέρω ξανά ποτέ να κοιτάξω ένα χάμπουργκερ όπως παλιά. Αν έχετε δει το Super Size Me, ξέρετε ακριβώς τι εννοώ. Αλήθεια, πώς επικοινωνούν την επιστήμη τα ντοκιμαντέρ? Πώς εξισορροπούν την ανάγκη για δραματική αφήγηση με την παρουσίαση τεκμηριωμένου περιεχομένου? Μπορούν να μας φέρουν πιο κοντά στην επιστήμη και στους επιστήμονες? Είναι τα ντοκιμαντέρ ένας αποτελεσματικός τρόπος να γνωρίσουμε νέα θέματα ή να αποκτήσουμε περισσότερες γνώσεις πάνω σε θέματα που μας είναι ήδη οικεία? Η βραβευμένη με Όσκαρ Βρετανίδα σκηνοθέτηδα και παραγωγός Elena Andreicheva φιλοξενείται στο Athens Science Festival και μας δίνει ορισμένες πολύ ενδιαφέρουσες απαντήσεις στα παραπάνω ερωτήματα. Στη συζήτηση που ακολουθεί με τίτλο «Η επικοινωνία της επιστήμης μέσα από τα ντοκιμαντέρ», η καταξιωμένη σκηνοθέτης θα αναδείξει επίσης το ρόλο που διαδραματίζουν τα ντοκιμαντέρ στην κατανόηση της επιστήμης αλλά και της τεχνολογίας. Τη συζήτηση θα συντονίσει ο Θανάσης Τρομπούκης, δημοσιογράφος στο IMED.
Welcome to Athens Science Festival. This discussion is supported by the British Council of Greece. My name is Thanasis Troboukis. I'm a data journalist with a background in video and documentary production. I've worked as a head of content for Vice Media in Greece and other major broadcasting media. Currently, I'm working for the non-profit organization IMED. IMED stands for Incubator for Media Education and Development. It's a non-profit journalism organization. Among the many things that this organization has been doing the last 2 years since our launch is to support transparency, credibility, and independence in journalism. We are working, along with my colleague Kelly Kiki, to introduce data journalism to the Greek media through our website labimed.org. I'm delighted to discuss today with the Oscar and BAFTA awarded producer, Elena Andreicheva, about documentaries' role as a means to understand science and technology. Elena has been working in documentaries since 2006, but also has a master's in science journalism. In our time, science documentaries do not just illustrate scientific claims. They visualize knowledge, while at the same time, they enable further scientific research. For instance, I believe that people and scientists perceive the world differently, having watched the BBC Earth documentaries, narrated by the extraordinary David Attenborough. We have all a better understanding of the sea creatures, having watched My Octopus Teacher. We understood how social media work after the social dilemma on Netflix, and we were shocked when we watched Icarus, about a documentary about doping in sports. As all these documentaries have made us wiser and enabled us to understand the world around us. So let's jump straight into our discussion with Elena, and please feel free to participate by sending your questions in the chat box. Elena, first of all, welcome and congratulations for the Oscar and BAFTA awards on your documentary. You've lived the dream of every filmmaker. So I will start with the main question. Can you tell us first about your documentary that was awarded, and secondly, about your experience at the Oscars?
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's really exciting to be part of this conversation, part of the Athens Science Festival. So the documentary you speak of, which being part of which was an incredible experience and stroke of luck for me, I suppose. It's called Learning to Skateboard in a War Zone, brackets, if you're a girl, which is a very important bit, even though it's in brackets. And it's about the everyday courage that women and girls living in Kabul, Afghanistan need just to go to school, just to take part in sport. It's a 40-minute observational documentary, and it's a very gentle look at what it, despite the circumstances, despite the title, despite the war zone, it really is a gentle look at trying to observe what it's like to be a girl in those circumstances. I was very fortunate to work with the wonderful director Carol Dicing on film. And obviously super proud of how far it managed to go.
You lived the dream. You walked on the red carpet, right?
This is true. This is true. Although obviously it feels a million miles away now, sat in my bedroom. But no, of course, super incredible. I think as most people, and crucially our fellow documentary filmmakers that we met during that sort of crazy time, as everyone realized, it's just so surreal. You actually can't really make a lot of sense of it. You just got to go with it. It means very different things to very different people. I think there's a lot of people there that, if you're winning an award for, a unique performance and you work really hard on it, it's kind of all on you. But if you worked on a film like we did, it's really more about speaking about the issue and bringing that to light. And oh my God, I mean, the number of people that, you can reach and talk about that subject matter on the red carpet, as you said, it is just incredible. And for documentary filmmakers, obviously an absolutely dream audience. And the fact that people were very receptive to that was obviously extra super awesome. So, I mean, I have zero specific stories. All of them are very embarrassing conversations of me trying to talk to big celebrities about film. I mean, I'm not going to bore you with that. It's just you don't want to relive it, but you sort of do. What can I say?
It's a story to tell. For sure. So I've said before that you've been working in documentaries, in TV production since 2006, but you've also studied physics and you have a master's in science journalism. How easy is it to communicate scientific knowledge via a video or a documentary?
Well, I think it all depends on what it is, because documentary is a very broad and brilliant medium, but it's also very specific about the components that you need. So, of course, you need something to look at. It needs to be observable, basically, in sort of science language, isn't it? And or observable in a way that you can cleverly design. So, there's whole production companies we've got here in the UK that work on programs that design experiments to illustrate certain concepts, for sort of younger audiences, and both young and old, frankly. So and that's brilliant, and you can learn a lot about Newtonian physics, through films like that. You can, you mentioned the Attenborough authored films, and I think most of us have seen one or two, or if you haven't, do it. But again, you see such beautiful locations, you see these incredible creatures, these environments. You see that happening. It's very accessible. I think my concern, I suppose, for really the limitation, I think, with documentaries and communicating science is the resources, the creativity, and the willingness of people to communicate things that are not that obvious, to just, you point your camera, it's there, it's done. I think that's tricky because, of course, it rules certain topics out. And when topics are more challenging, they're less likely to, be shown and communicated and, get they just don't get a hearing. So I think that is the big limitation, really. You've got the right subject matter and the right character, it's zero problem, as far as I think.
I'll ask you later about the characters that drive a documentary, especially in scientific documentaries. I think they are very important. I was wondering the following. Scientific knowledge is multi-dimensional. It's layered. While documentaries usually have a linear narrative. What are the dangers while trying to communicate scientific knowledge through this medium, through a documentary?
Well, in terms of it being linear, I mean, I suppose you can get stuck on the wrong things. In my experience, sometimes producers of documentaries want to emphasize certain things, some certain dramatic aspects at the expense of something else. But I think it's a real tension, and one I don't have the answer to. But I personally believe that drama can be created from the desire to want to know the answer. And if you explain or show that, given documentaries, they're a visual medium, well enough, people will want to know the answer. And so you won't have to resort to devices that kind of sideline the science and go for the jugular, like someone having an argument, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Classic
documentary trope, like, go quickly, film that guy because they're having a row about something. And I'm like, I don't care, because, well, it's a little bit exciting, but it's not that interesting. So I think, I suppose making science documentaries, ideally does require you to really delve into that subject matter and really kind of understand what the stepping stones are in that story, even if the story is really about finding an answer. I guess, so you can make that drama work for the viewer. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. I want to move the discussion a little bit about the pandemic, because it's the elephant in the room, unfortunately. So we've all been struggling the last year. Do you think that scientists did a good work communicating to the people the situation? And what about journalists or video journalists or documentaries, video producers? And what lessons are there to be learned?
Yeah. It's like you get a role. It's like what you watch every day. It's what you hear every day. Of course, we've had the kind of the multi-part series, haven't we? And obviously, not to say that in a flippant way at all, but that has been our reality. We've essentially had a huge amount of science communication happening every day. Personally, in my humble opinion, I think scientists have done a wonderful job. I think what's been difficult for them is obviously trying to explain something quite complex and something about which they have a lot of uncertainty, like communicating in a situation where they ideally wouldn't be communicating at that point, but they have to. It's super important that they do. So in that respect, I think they've done incredibly well. And I actually think one of the things, maybe I'm a super positive person, but I think one of the things we can come out with is an understanding that the public, the people that are not, involved in science communication, either on the science or the journalism side, are able to take in a lot about uncertainty and retain their trust and their respect of science. And I think that's actually something maybe we can learn as science communicators, and scientists, to be more open to showing that, talking about that, because it's been inevitable and it's happened and the cat's out of the bag. But I personally believe that science has come out, looking pretty good, even though, sometimes, communicating alongside governments, and sometimes alongside very unhelpful governments that, do not help to convey the message. So that's my personal take. I say this, obviously understanding that I'm in the UK science reporting bubble, and of course there are countries around the world that don't. I think I don't know whether it's true to say they haven't retained or didn't in the first place have the same, perhaps, attitude to scientists in the medical establishment, and for some very genuine reasons, there is a distrust, and it continues to this day. I'm originally from Ukraine, and there's a lot of skepticism about the authenticity of medicines, and are they real? Just this sort of fact, and I think obviously that can confuse. But just if you're talking about a purely, I think, communicating the science sort of subject, I actually feel really positive about it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think, yes, on many occasions we had politically motivated scientists that made the announcements, unfortunately, and they used science for political gain. for some reason. But what I will keep from what you said is the communicating the uncertainty, because science is all about uncertainty. So I think that the general population needs to be educated regarding to this aspect of scientific communication. So are there specific rules that you follow while producing science documentaries that you need to follow? And can you tell us a few things about the workflow, about your workflow, some do's and don'ts maybe?
Okay, sure. I mean, not the answer in a very annoying way, but it depends on the outlet, because, the first thing I look at is, what's the duration of the piece and what's the audience? And as a documentary filmmaker anyway, of course, you have to look at those things. If it's a short piece and it's part of a series, you have to find what the unifying theme is. And is the unifying theme even the science? Or is it something else? So even though it could be a science story, you might need to present it in a way that's slightly different. So I'll give you an example. I worked on a series looking at teams around the world that were competing for a prize to send a rocket and a rover to the moon, right? So it's not simple science at all, but you have, 7 minutes. You can't go into the science, but what you do have is you have different teams around the world. So it really became about focusing on what the science and the endeavor meant to each team, as opposed to what are the nuts and bolts of the construction. So I think you have to, I suppose, the first thing is you recognize, is it about, what is it about? Is it about the science? Is it not about that? But obviously, if you're working on something pretty purely, you have to go into the science, you have to understand it. Most of the time, it's too complex with, based for even if you're deeply embedded in some scientific discipline, you're not going to know everything. So I did a piece about Nobel Prize winners one year, and it was really complicated. And I rang my old friends on the course to ask.
Do you understand?
Can you please explain this to me? and got a few sort of different ways of seeing it, and then tried to find a way to make that make sense. I remember what was really useful is trying to talk to people about it. So, you do the usual thing of you retell the story. Does it make sense? Is it interesting? That's what I do. And that's actually also a really good way of sorting, is the story compelling and why?
Often in documentaries, we find a character to drive the narration. What happens in science documentaries? Do the same rules apply?
I think so, to a very large degree, because I think, because even if you have, again, just taking a really easy to relate to example, a documentary about the behavior of meerkats, in a beautifully shot Attenborough documentary, we've moved quite far away now from the kind of presenter-led science documentary, and I think there's definitely a tendency to want to jump straight in with whoever the sort of the primary source is. So in this case, the meerkat. So obviously, at that point, the meerkats are the characters. I believe that. I think that's how people watch those films, and I think that works really well. And I think that we've managed to kind of go in deeper on that subject matter. And I'm seeing a lot more of that actually in documentaries about conservation, and any documentaries that typically, feature animals. Well, My Octopus Teacher, for example. Yes. Yeah. So you can watch 1,000, documentaries about conservation, and you can watch that documentary, and you can, through the friendship, just really feel something different. So I do think characters are really important. However, I think sometimes some science concepts, and again, this depends on sort of who the creative is behind the camera, they lend themselves to these, the essay film, which I think sort of does what it says on the tin. So it's really about a filmmaker, sometimes alongside a scientist, sometimes not, conceiving of something they want to talk about, subject matter, and then kind of composing the film around that using visuals, using, narration or other people's voices and stuff. And characters are important within that, in that you want to see people you want to watch, you want to see things you want to watch. But I think you can make it more essay-esque and create more an atmosphere and a sense of wonder, which is, of course, what a lot of science documentaries, aim to do, want to do, through that kind of approach, which I think is can be harder to do and maybe less common, but can be equally beautiful. I'm a kind of a character-led kind of a gal, but I recognize the beauty of the other.
You said before that in a science documentary, you create the drama by making the people want to know the answer, something like that. Is this what? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I find it fascinating, actually. There.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's. Yeah, I understand your question. I'm just sort of trying to unpack that in a way that it isn't too faffy. So bear with. I suppose, when you're talking about entertainment versus education, which is, I think, a constant theme in science documentaries and, all the things we discuss. I just think that knowledge can be very entertaining. So this is the basis from which I'm coming.
And that was my next question, by the way. Do you feel that science documentaries should be more educational and less entertaining, or vice versa, or both?
Well, right, yeah, no, and I found your question really thought-provoking, and spent a little bit of time thinking about it, and actually, yeah, trying to unpack what is the essence of entertainment. I mean, let's not get into that, but it's not just visuals. I think it is the quest to find out, and so let me sort of try and give an example. There is. Yeah, I think there's something very compelling about a person who is on a mission or a quest, and it's a very basic storytelling narratival sort of device. And I actually happen to think we don't see enough scientists doing that. So I love it when, a scientist goes on some kind of, quest or journey to find out what that thing that is so compelling for them to find out. They don't always, but often they live and breathe it. They give up hours of their time for it. It's their job. It's everything. And also it just so happens to be, it relates to how the world works and the fabric of the universe and any of these things. So you just think, wow, I want to know the answer to that question. I think that can be incredibly powerful and entertaining, and I think perhaps that's what I enjoy about watching certain docs. That kind of the process, I suppose, the process.
Do you have, when you are producing a science documentary, do you have in mind that the audience has a certain education level towards it? And how easy is it to popularize scientific knowledge and make the story relatable in a way to the general population?
So again, I would say with some very small exceptions, such as I think if I was producing putting together a film for a known science strand, we have Horizon on the BBC here in the UK, so it's a well-known strand. Again, I would never assume some specific level of knowledge, but I'd probably assume, the person who's watching that, may well have their, science GCSE sort of up to 16, maybe a little bit beyond that. So, and with an interest as well. But beyond that, I probably would just start from scratch and see, okay, can I, what can I, how can I communicate this? Not simply, just clearly, I guess. And sorry, the second part of your question, just remind me.
And how easy is it to popularize scientific knowledge? How is it to make it lighter in a way? I put it in many brackets because the scientists that are watching us now.
No. I get what you're saying. Okay, I'll give you an example because I was just thinking about it earlier today and feeling kind of horrified. Some years ago, I spent some time working on kind of a shorter form science stories for a channel, and of course, not every story gets made, so you have a slate and you have a choice of 3, let's say, and let's say one of them is a story about mountain goats in Italy. One is about bears in Canada, and the third is about something else. And you go into those, and they get selected based on how charismatic the scientist is. How much money can you? How easy is it to film those animals? How and it's really less, to be honest. It can be a lot less about how interesting or current the science. So you definitely in some formatted situations, you're not really, I think, choosing on the basis of the best of the best of the best, in that respect. And that is, of course, we have to acknowledge that and be aware of that. And of course, you try not to go down those, that route if you're creating, maybe a feature size documentary from scratch. But certainly in a lot of programs that are seen, that did happen. So that choice was made, and for a reason that is probably a little bit tenuous.
We have 2 questions from the audience. 3. We just received one more. So what do you think about showing the unedited truth for subjects like war or climate crisis that can be really harsh? How can you successfully raise awareness for a cause? So
Sure. So yeah, just in terms of the unedited truth, I wonder if the asker of the question could expand. What do you mean?
I believe that they mean raw footage, maybe from war, from victims, maybe, or from animals that have been hurt because of the climate crisis, the climate change.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. Yeah. So, I mean, I think history, recent media history has shown that we have a very short memory about the suffering of others. And I haven't, working in more recently in kind of more sociopolitical subject matter, actually, I haven't really come to a genuine answer to, the question posed, because there is something about witnessing suffering that does not necessarily bring out people's empathy, and it does not necessarily act as a call to action. And I think that, again, without sort of, pandering too much or saying, oh, but you've got to see the positives. You actually do to keep living. If we're talking about something where action can be taken, I think you have to, if you want a call to action, you can show very harsh footage. Of course you can, obviously. I think there's nothing wrong with that, or including difficult images, absolutely. But I think those alone will not get you to where you're trying to get to.
Yeah. Can animations make a documentary more approachable and likable to both children and adults?
I mean, sure. I mean, animation's amazing, the things you can do with it.
Very expensive, unfortunately.
Very, very expensive. Great for subject matter that is not just more accessible to children because it's animation, but also are more accessible in that you can reach more subject matter. So a few films that I've recently encountered use animation when people won't go on camera because they're worried about repercussions. So again, if you're talking about a powerful climate story and you talk about actors, you can go there. You can go there in animation. That's amazing. I think also the best animation, the kind of trippy kind, can do wonders to open up sort of your brain to new concepts. You've only to watch. I don't have a great knowledge of English language cartoons from as a child, but my partner's been showing some to my son, and they're really trippy. But they seem to make perfect sense and are beautiful and really spark something in the imagination. So yeah, absolutely. I think I'm all for that. It can be very powerful. I think animation's come a really long way. It's always been an amazing medium, but I think people's perception of it, people will sit down and watch an animated feature, I think, a grown-up one.
They do help to explain scientific knowledge, right, to the general population. They are very extremely helpful because you can break down what the message is. So is it different to produce science documentaries for TV and for theaters, and what are the main differences?
Well, I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier this idea of formats. So for television, increasingly in the UK and the US as well, it's you're either proposing a series about something, and it's very difficult to get one-off films just commissioned, made. So and when you're part of a series, there's a certain kind of formatting that happens along there, meaning they all kind of have to fit a similar mold. Or if you're making it for a particular commission, a particular person who asked you to do so, you're very much, sometimes kind of more of them. There's basically more limitations, I would say. They can be good limitations. They can be absolutely fine. And then they can be also quite challenging. With films that are made, either independently or funded as feature films, and intended to be seen in the cinema, I think the main thing would be the bar. It is kind of different. You could say higher in the sense that it's very expensive to put on a film in the cinema. So the distributors will be extremely concerned with who is going to watch it. So, and if it's a documentary, anyone will have to need to watch it for them to put any money to it or to put it on the cinema. So I think you have to have a very potent mix of something that's got a lot of heart, that looks amazing, that, that's led by some incredible characters, I think a real mix of that, or an incredible amount of money behind it.
We talked briefly before about uncertainty in science, and I want to come back to that because I think it's a great point that you said before. So science is about uncertainty in a way. For instance, string theory in physics is an educated guess. It's a hypothesis, let's say. I wonder, how do you illustrate or visualize this uncertainty without degrading the final result or the science itself in a film?
Well, I think that I think the thing is you have to then talk about the process, and that and I think that's brilliant. I think we can get kind of a bit braver about doing that, just obviously in the context of my answer about whether communication's been good or not and what we've had to communicate. Well, a large part of that has been, we're not sure, it's all happening, just give us a second, we're working on it, etc. That's brilliant. And also I think again, if we're just speaking about the communication of COVID-19, because obviously on the scientific sort of level, and not talking about all the all the incredibly tragic human stories behind the statistics, but the science has actually been really compelling. It's an incredible story. So, and I think the uncertainty has been a powerful element in that, and driving, wanting to know what how it can be done, what will happen and why. And so I do.
You can use it for your benefit, that in a way that benefits the film itself, if I understand correctly.
Exactly. It's a win-win in that sense. So I suppose I think uncertainty, actually, dramatically speaking, is great. Is great. The problem, of course, is that there's a school of thought that will say, well, if science has got as much uncertainty as all these other jokers, why do we give them special privilege? But that's why I think you have to in that process show in that kind of process of talking about uncertainty, you have to show the method. You have to show why it's important. You have to show, and that's why it works. So we can talk about uncertainty and not be embarrassed.
We have two more questions from the audience that I want to bring into the discussion. Are there any revolutionary new techniques that are used to make documentaries more interesting?
Well, I'm not sure of your definition of revolutionary. Two things that are obviously, I think, helping to expand what we can see and what we're being shown, and how. One is obviously the, technology is, in terms of capturing footage, is amazing. Yes. So, battery life's getting better, all of these things. And they allow us to capture a lot more things. So many, you're hearing every year, a documentary coming out, it's an animal you've never seen, or like, we've never seen this behavior, it really exists, these kind of things. I wouldn't call them, they're probably not revolutionary, but it matters because it shows things that you didn't know. And I think that's really important. I'm not aware of that sort of analogy in other types of sciences, but I feel like there probably would be, because we're getting better and better at recording, different frame rates, but, so being able to capture incredibly slow motion movement. So you can, again, what else can you do with that? On the other sort of end of the scale, but similarly, we're also at the same time digging up archive footage, so old footage, but we can remaster it and make it incredible and really powerful to watch. And I think that brings a new aspect in as well. So again, it just expands what you could see as part of a science documentary. Oh, you could watch a film, it's archived, but normally you think, oh, that's about history, it's about something about World War II, but this, you can kind of find out more about the history of science, I suppose, if you have access to archive, or if there's a way of working it into a film that's really compelling. So I think there's kind of backwards and forwards. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that technology plays a major role, especially in documentaries and science documentaries that have to do with nature. So it becomes better, cheaper, and smaller. So that's like the best thing that can happen to a filmmaker, right? I can't think of another way that you can capture, for instance, animal behavior, or even the not atoms, because we cannot capture them exactly, but cells and the way that the human body works. I think, yes, because this is the knowledge this is why science documentaries, I believe, that are extremely important, because it makes sense with the way that they portray science. It makes sense for the general population, for the common knowledge. It makes sense. The other question.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, tell me.
Yeah. I'll just add something that's just come to mind. I read something the other day about how in the UK they're trialing a new because of coronavirus and the lack of treatment, follow-up treatment on lots of other illnesses, they're trialing this new test, which involves swallowing a camera, which can go through your system and check for certain.
Yeah, for cancer.
So, for instance, let's say you're doing a film. Let's say you think, oh, I don't know how I'd do that film. And well, now you can film with someone getting this test, and then you can get the footage from the camera. And will it be compelling? Probably not, but it's the start of something, isn't it? I think you have to be super kind of open-minded to these sort of things. Anyway, it just amused me because it used to be in the realm of science fiction, of course.
And we discussed a little bit right before we went live this. Could VR technology be used to make documentaries more compelling to the audience? So immersive documentaries, this is a big topic.
It is. I'll be really honest. I've not had hands-on experience of that. And I find it, as a result, quite difficult to speak on those capabilities. I think it's very interesting. I think it's a case of what are you seeing? How are you seeing it? And does that make a difference? Does that help? Does that hinder? I mean, in our sort of very brief discussion of that, I think I mentioned a project that looked at using VR to put the person somewhere physically, and they thought that doing so would lead them to experience more empathically the situation, and it did not have that outcome. So, but of course, that's a kind of a feeling kind of approach. But perhaps in a perception of ideas approach, it can work a lot better if it's seen in that way. So I'm really open to that. I'm really open to that, but I'm not sure.
Are there any other trends that you want to share with us regarding documentary production? I mean, I'm sure the audience would love to hear more.
Trends, like new sort of trends. Well, I mean, I think I mentioned this idea of getting footage you wouldn't normally get. I mean, you're even both in human documentaries, you're seeing, the kind of the chimps that do their own selfies, and and yes, of course, it can seem kind of funny, but at the same time, could you watch a documentary in 5 years if someone's mastered how to do that? Maybe.
Do you like the explainers that, like the Vox kind explainers videos that are produced right now? How do you feel about them? I
find them great. I mean, I love an infographic. I think they're absolutely wonderful. They're really that. I'm a big fan of that. I think for documentary, it's a case of, what else can you get your hands on footage-wise? And I think that will dictate where the trends go. Because in terms of storytelling, we do tend to rely, I suppose, on very similar old but good kind of tropes, and that's absolutely fine. Perhaps it's kind of perhaps it's wired into us in some way.
Great. Let's see what the future will bring to the filmmakers. I'm sure technology advances at such a pace that we don't know what will happen in the next 5 years or so. So, how do you feel do you feel that women scientists are represented equally in science documentaries like men do? Or if not, what should change regarding that?
I think probably not. I mean, just kind of off the top of my head, very kind of rough scan of what I've seen, I would say not. Obviously, I'm happy to be contradicted. And on the one hand, obviously, it typically represents reality, which is that there are fewer scientists, especially in some disciplines, than there are men. And you could say, oh, that's fine. I do believe it, it matters, that representation matters. I think I think it is important that young women, girls, see themselves in that role. I think there is a slight kind of there can be a slight kind of feeling like women can't be a bit nuts and cerebral. I think that's a shame. Mm-hmm. They obviously can. We know that, but it's obviously like the extreme example. But I think it is important, and I think that, for instance, when choosing protagonists, for your next documentary, I certainly have started thinking a little, definitely more openly in that way, because I see that this isn't always true, and absolutely not true for all men and women, of course. But I do think sometimes, the questions are shaped by certain people. And if those people are predominantly men, what are we missing out on? I think that's a shame. So I think we want to include that. And we might then end up seeing lots of films we haven't seen about all sorts of things that somehow just haven't happened. So I think that's worth not missing out on.
Was it challenging for you to be a woman in physics in the university?
You know what? It actually wasn't. I would say, I didn't really. My recollections are I didn't really experience any particular issues in that way. I mean, would it have made a difference a little bit more subliminally to see more women out there, to see more than 10% of us in my course, to see more women in positions of senior positions around? Yeah, maybe.
They were mostly men, right? When you were studying in the department.
Yeah, I would say it is fair to say in my department, which is probably one of the least diverse on the gender kind of on the gender level subject matter, it just is, or certainly was at that time. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing when you're that young and you're just trying to do something. It might not matter to you. You might not want to speak on that. You're not going to start, fighting for your rights because there's you don't feel represented. But I think that if there's anything about that culture that makes you feel like you perhaps don't want to progress or you don't have a place there, then I think that, that's worth taking a look at again and formulating questions that are of interest. Again, that's not to say that there are different questions for men and women, but I think again, just checking that we're not missing anything here.
We have 3 minutes and 3 questions. So,
oh my God!
Can we mingle science with fiction to make it look sexier, like the Big Bang Theory?
Oh my God! Well, why not?
Why not?
People love the Big Bang Theory. It's great. It reminds me of university. I mean, I think the question is, do people learn from it? Do you think they do? If they do, then great. Why not?
I don't think. I mean, it makes it more humane, like the science. But I'm not sure that they are actually learning. By the way, it's my favorite show.
Is it? Well, you
Yes.
know what? But actually, just to add, if they don't learn anything, that's fine. Do we want to see more scientists as just like people, characters that exist in life? Definitely. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah,
So,
and also more women.
Yes.
Because the Big Bang Theory, they were only men, and the woman was she was a waitress.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a bit problematic. And what would you
anyway? Yeah.
What would you advise a young and active student that wants to raise awareness for a cause via a documentary?
I would suggest that you get in touch with some organizations that are working similar subject matter, and you look at what's been made in terms of documentaries on that subject. You try and talk to as many people as possible, and then you try and formulate why it is that you want to make the film, what makes it unique, and you go back and talk to those people again and put together a proposal, and then try and approach people with it.
Last but not least, your 5 most favorite science documentaries that you would suggest us to watch.
Right. Yes. Okay. So amazing archive remastered footage, Apollo 11, incredible documentary filmed by the astronaut. I mean, yeah, incredible. Into the Inferno, super trippy, Werner Herzog essay kind of documentary about our love of volcanoes. Absolutely intense and yeah, like a different look. My Octopus Teacher, definitely worth a watch. Just if you're even just interested in the construction of documentaries, because I think that's it helps a lot. What's the hold on a second. The Most Unknown is one that I watched specifically in preparation for our discussion, and it's great. It's all about scientists wanting to know the answer to each of their questions, and they all travel to meet each other, and it's really nicely done. It's I would say it's a super good watch. And My Beautiful Broken Brain, which is a really visually beautiful film that tries to convey a woman's experience after having a stroke and how she perceives the world. Hopefully a sort of a decent mix in there.
Elena, thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.